We too north to be south to be north. Where I'm from, Virginia. Of course, too south to be north to be south. What it's like. Hey yo, it is what it is. Yeah, hey yo, what it is what it is. It couldn't be nothing else. We brought
Charlie?
Yeah.
Hey, what's going on? It's Andy Kyler.
Andy, what's up, man?
How you doing?
I'm good. We just had a giant storm here, and now the power's out, so I'm got the radio on and milling around.
So, where are you right now?
I'm on the top of a mountain in Front Royal, Virginia, which is a super fun site.
Cool.
Yeah, you gotta love it. Well, yeah, during World War II, they manufactured parachutes here, and they dumped all the goo from making nylon into the Shenandoah. So it's a giant mess. But yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm sitting in a little cabin on top of a mountain, and that's where I live for the time being. That's
kind of how I always envisioned you, anyway. Even if that's not where you ever were.
Mhm.
But that always seemed like where you belong.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's a funny thing, like moving up to a mountain like this, man. I what do you say? I love solitude, but at the same time I like to be around people, and you can literally spend 3 days up here without seeing another soul, which is kind of I don't know, makes you very, very introspective and depressed and angry and the range of emotions.
Oh, believe me, you can get that way in the city too, surrounded by tons of people.
Yeah, the phrase "alone in a crowd."
Yeah, I get that way frequently in the city, unfortunately.
Yeah. I'm sure.
So,
how's LA?
LA is hot today. It's hot and sunny as per usual. Yesterday was pretty overcast, and we wound up at the beach, and it was very, very windy.
That could be good or bad.
Yeah, but I don't make it out to the beach all that often, so it was kind of like a special Mother's Day thing. We went to a restaurant that was right there and looking out over the ocean, and
nice.
that was pretty beautiful. So that gives the really nice side of LA. Right now, I'm commuting, which is sort of the other side, you know. Spending a lot of time in the car. Not in real bad traffic or anything, but I have like an hour-long commute, and that was part of the idea. Part of the idea for this podcast thing is just like I can actually do an interview show while I'm commuting to and from work. Yeah, I'm basically hosting a podcast behind the wheel of my car.
I dig it. It sounds like a good. I mean, you know, I listened to that. These two guys that were supposed to talk about like Boogeyman. I think it's called Boogeyman, and they were supposed to talk about like, you know, like these mythological, I don't know, creatures or whatever. And but they never talk about it. They always talk about themselves and their comedian lives. Like, what the hell, man? Come on, false advertising.
Well, that's kind of like us. We're supposed to be talking about music, and I guess we are connected to that podcast because you're kind of a mythological creature, I would say, to the Northern Virginia music scene.
Right. Well, you know, am I?
You are in my world.
Interesting.
I don't know about to anybody else, but ever since I was in high school and kind of discovered your band, you know, you guys were very mysterious to me because I didn't get a chance to really see you playing very much at that time,
right.
you know, and it was just from like mixtapes that were passed around that I had heard the recordings, like a couple of recordings on a mixtape in the first place, and then from Convergence I picked up the Rag 7-inch, which Bill probably sold me.
Yeah, I was probably like, oh, Bill probably sold that. You know what band you'd like? I can hear him right now. You know what you should try? This is this band you might be into. Yeah, that was a good EP. I actually like that one. It's sad it never got more exposure. But anyway, I think one of the problems that Ugly had was we were kind of like a bipolar band. We played acoustic sets, and then we did electric sets as well. So we kind of came up with like two different modalities or two different representations, excuse me, of ourselves. So we had like, we would play these drawn out, sometimes 4-hour-long sets where we would basically play like the same. We would have 1 2-hour set and then take a break and then play another 2-hour set with the exact same thing. But the people were either drunk enough or they cycled through so that nobody knew the difference. And that was more the acoustic side of things, because the only way you could get gigs was, we weren't folksy enough to be in the folk world, which, was like propagated at that point by aging 60s people. What do you call them? There's a word for that.
Hippies?
Yeah, the hippies, but it was more like the people who played at the Birchmere, and we never got to play at the Birchmere, which was, I always, kind of would have been a hallmark of mine, like a punk rocker playing at, 930 Club or something. Yeah, and then on the flip side, we did like punk rock shows, which I think Bill and Chuck were mostly instrumental in, because everybody kind of had their hand in things. I mean, Tom, our first real bass player, he played on Round Boy Laughing. He was an amazing musician. He used to tour as the roadie for Government Issue. And then Chuck was just like, he was a in the scene. Chuck was like one of the, I think one of the main reasons we got anywhere close to, being able to play, because he was always on the phone hounding people to let us play gigs. And then Bill was, active in the DC scene. So he was kind of like, it was kind of with all those avenues, it kind of ended up making us what we were, which I guess was, the point of the band, right? Kind of put all those personalities and abilities together.
Well, do you think that that like punk and acoustic, like the kind of music that you did, do you think it's because of influences from the area? I mean, do you think that had anything to do with Virginia itself and the kind of other bands that were there and the kind of music you were surrounded by and growing up with?
You can't help but be influenced by that stuff. I mean, when I was in high school, I remember it was funny. I always followed my brother's lead, because he was 5 years older than me, and kind of like I would take my musical knowledge from him. And when I was in middle school, he was a big, like metal guy in high school, and so I was like, yeah, heavy metal's the way to go. Which seems to be like, heavy metal seems to be the lead-in for punk, because it's commercial and it's, widely available. And then I actually had a weird experience. So my dad was a forest biologist, and we moved to Hawaii for my freshman year of high school, which sounds, glamorous, but it's one of those DC things. He was studying tropical agriculture in order to go to Syria, funny enough, and teach them how to do stuff like prawn farming. So we lived in Hawaii for a year where basically I got the shit kicked out of me for being a white kid. And, and that's where I kind of like, he went to, my brother went to the University of Hawaii for his sophomore year of college. And I think I was a freshman in high school, and he got into new wave and stuff. So he came home with like REM records and Oingo Boingo. In fact, it's funny. I went to see my first concert ever. I think I was 15, and I went to 14 or 15, and I went to the Neil Blaisdell Center to see U2 and Oingo Boingo play, which was funny because U2's thing is before the internet, right? So nobody knew what the show was going to be. U2 did the same exact show everywhere. Like you get the same one you see it like where he pulls the girl up out of the audience and wraps her in a flag.
Yeah.
That was like it was like the exact same set list, the exact, like they rehearsed the show and they had it down to a, like a thing. And I don't know, it was kind of, to me, I was kind of like, it was a great show, but Oingo Boingo was so much better. They were all over the place. They were just like freaking out. Danny Elfman's a madman. But, yeah, so that was my first concert. And then moving back to D.C. was interesting in that time because it was 1985. And, like all of a sudden, I remember going to Penguin Feather Records in Fairfax, or in Vienna, where Anita's is now. And going in there, and there was a girl named Cynthia. I'll never forget it. She was like a short, stout girl who had crazy hair, and then there was like a hippie dude with long black hair, and they had the head shop back in the corner or whatever. But they were playing something on the turntable, and I was like, "What the hell is that? That's awesome!" And there, she was like, "Oh, that's Iggy Pop." And I was like, "What? Who's Iggy? What an eccentric name! I love it." And it was a import that I think I paid $12 for, which I wish I still had. But it's like him with silver elbow gloves and silver pants and no shirt and a bunch of makeup on the cover, and then it was, it was all the great Iggy Pop hits, and that kind of got me hooked. I was like, what is this? And I brought it home, and this is like the first time I think I had my own thought musically. My brother was like, "What are you listening to?" I was like, "Iggy Pop," and he was like, "Ugh, punk rock." He was much more evolved, right? Like he had the taste, I guess. He was much more into like he didn't like blues music. He still doesn't like blues music, as far as I know. But he was really into like more like electronic stuff.
Mhm.
Which was it was cool. Like a lot of we shared a lot of interests, but at the same time, like I love blues. I think the blues is it's the foundation for everything. It just evolves differently as it goes along. But anyway, you got like Iggy Pop and then the New York Dolls. I think I went back the next week and I was like, "What else do you have?" And they were like, "How about the New York Dolls?" And I was like, "Great." Which is funny because at the time I thought, man, these bands are really old, but you're thinking like 77, right? So
it was only 8 years.
Yeah, it's it's a really short period. It shows you how music and fashion and all that shit changes instantly. It's hard to get perspective on anything really once you get older and you're like, oh, well, what's the point? Everything's changing so fast. Why do I even try to adjust? But and then I found out about the hardcore thing. I was a sophomore at Oakton. We'd come back from Hawaii, and I went to Oakton High School in Vienna, I guess, Virginia. And there was a girl named Madge who had a big mohawk. It was awesome. And she made me a mixtape of all these different hardcore bands, and I made her I think it was REM and a bunch of that early 80s stuff. I like that kind of weird. REM was so different at that time. Now they're just I after their third album, I lost all respect for them. Once you could understand what's his name,
Michael Stipe?
Michael Stipe, yeah. Once you could understand Michael Stipe, it was kind of lost to me. I was like, oh, what's the point? He's not saying anything worthwhile, you know? And so then I got hooked on, like, I remember there was a Black Market Baby song on there, and there was a Circle Jerk song. And I was kind of like, oh, this is cool. You know, it was a little bit different perspective. And then I think that same year, my like sophomore and junior year were really pivotal for me. Because I remember I went into music and arts in Oakton, which used to be an awesome, they could still be. I have no idea. I haven't been there in ages. But I went into music and arts, and they were playing the Minutemen. What Makes Men Start Fires. Or what? Is that it? Yeah, I think that's it. And I grabbed that album and immediately just became addicted to the Minutemen. I was like, this is it. They're smart, they're sharp, right? Like there's no, like their lyrics are pungent and beautiful, and you know what I mean? I was kind of like they're just doing something that only they can do. Which I thought was great. So, yeah, then it just kind of developed from there. And Northern Virginia, I think it's one of those funny things, like you're talking about. I mean, it's a podcast about Northern Virginia music, right? So,
yeah, ostensibly.
The funny thing is that we didn't really have a whole lot of peers. We really didn't have any peers when we were starting, because it was basically me writing songs and then finding people to play with. I mean, the first idea of Ugly, I think we called it Big Ugly, and it was a guy named Wally Judd who played drums, and he worked at Tyson's, and his bass player was a guy named Waylon Shotwell who I think worked at a restaurant that my guitar teacher's girlfriend worked at, and they were looking for a singer, and they were like, they were kind of like, what do you listen to? And they had grown up playing like, prog rocky stuff. Right? I don't know if it's prog rock. Rush. They were like, I remember they did what's that, Red Barchetta or something like that. I forget what that song is. I've never been a Rush fan.
I'm not a Rush guy. I was just about to say, so.
I'm like, I don't know. It's like, Rush is kind of like, I don't know. It's the guy who wants to pull his dick out at a party but never does. But anyway, yeah. So we would we played with I lost my train of thought. So I met those guys, and we learned some songs, and that was the first time I ever played originals. But then I'd done some like talent shows or whatever in high school, and then went to played with these guys. Then the drummer got hit by a car and killed when I was 19. It was my first year out of high school, my freshman year in life. So he, so that was kind of like destructive to me. But then I started playing with this dude Nima, and he was big around, pretty good guitar player, and he had a good creative sense too, but he was just, I think he was a little too wild to be there. So we played together for like a year or so, and then he split, but he had introduced me to Tom, the bass player that played with, or toured with Government Issue. Tom introduced, like everybody started bringing in people, so all of a sudden, like, Tom he did like title searches or something, and he met this drummer Hector who was also doing title searches. So the band became Hector Gutierrez, Tom Downey, Charlie Post. And then we had this weird guy that I loved to death, but he was crazy. His name was Brian Green. He was kind of like a hippie dude. And he was going to play percussion because I've been a big fan of percussion my whole life, and I've always wanted to get like, you know, if you could have like a Macho Machito sort of percussion with like weird, almost like have you ever listened to King Crimson?
Yeah.
So you know Lark's Tongues and Aspic?
Not really.
Okay.
I only know the one King Crimson album that's like probably their biggest album.
Oh, Three of a Perfect Pair.
That's the one with Schizoid, with 20th Century Schizoid Man, and
no, that's the very first one. Yeah, that one's good too.
And in the Court of the Crimson King.
That one's good, but if you really want to get like, my favorite King Crimson is Starless and Bible Black and Lark's Tongues and Aspic. Those two records are, I think they're high points. Right? It's just like everything about it is genius, and you have to listen to it on vinyl. it's one of those things. Like I actually ripped it from vinyl to my computer so that I could hear the pops and the scratches, and you know when they're coming, you're like, right here, there's like a skip. I don't know what happened to this record, but it's like, but yeah. There's like tons of percussion in there. I think it's Bill Bruford who's doing the percussion and drum work, but it's just crazy. Like there are these 10-minute crescendos where they start from nothing, and they're just like there's like a dude playing a thumb piano, and then you know what I mean, and then like other like cacophonous sort of like bells and things come in, and they're building and they're building and they're building, and then it comes just into like this monster guitar riff, which that's kind of like one of those like Whole Lotta Love moments where you're when the solo hits, where it's like bam bam. So like, oh man, that's beautiful. Kind of gets you. But
so you guys had percussion in Ugly later on.
Yeah.
And that's
well, we had it early on. I mean, there were so many iterations of Ugly. I actually played with a bass player named Dave Bombert came later. Dave Yo and a guy named Steve Rashakis, who's was like a eclectic player. He plays like oh god, I couldn't even remember the name of the instruments, but he plays all sorts of weird instruments. Like I want to say yurts, but that's a thing you live in. But yeah, he was like really like he was kind of crazy intellectual guy that I think he's a principal of the school now. And Dave is living in Richmond, and he had played with like there's funny stories about all these people. Like Dave his story was he'd never played upright bass before. He'd only played electric bass, and he goes to VCU, and his dad worked for Boozy and Hawks, which is like a school music instrument maker, and he's like, hey, I need to try out for this, for whatever it was, like the jazz band, I think, which was at that time run by Ellis Marsalis of the Wynton Marsalis fame.
Yeah.
And so Dave's literally waiting at the music school at VCU, and his dad drives down from Northern Virginia with a upright bass that he'd gotten because it had a broken neck. So his dad glued the neck back on the night before, brought it down. I could be telling this completely wrong. It always sounded a little hokey to me. But his dad shows up with this upright bass and is like, try this out. And Dave scored like second chair, having never played upright bass before. Yeah. So and then this dude Jeff Compton, and then we did a show at DC Space, which I think was our first show as Ugly. were those guys. I remember we did like a couple originals, then we did a short set. It was like a half-hour set, and we did a Bela Lugosi's Dead, the Bauhaus song.
I love that song.
Yeah, I do too, and it was cool because Jeff was doing. I'm a big fan of like, don't, you know, you use your instrument, don't play your instrument, right? So you have to like, I mean, it helps to know your instrument and know scales and all that shit, but it also helps to forget all that shit and remember that it's a thing that makes sound, right? So Jeff would play the hi-hat stand more than he would the hi-hat. So he'd be going, you know, with his foot, he'd be going like with the hi-hat, but then he'd be playing the stand, and then one of the other stands made a little higher pitched sound, so he would hit that. So it was kind of that, you know, the main of that he did on the stands and not the actual drums or cymbals, like rims and stands. That was it. But it was pretty cool. And then
I love it.
Yeah, that was nice. And then and then it came the Tom Green era. Oh, I'm mixing up stuff too. There was another section. It's really funny. We went from so Nima was big in the hardcore scene too. In the early days, he'd come from, I think, Falls Church High School, and he like introduced a lot of, you know, interesting, weird shit, because he was also like a seeker. Like, you know, I feel like we weren't so much. And I feel like this about all of Northern Virginia, actually. Like I was listening to, what was it, Repercussion in preparation for the phone call. I was like, well, what are the Northern Virginia bands I'm forgetting? I mean, you know, there were a bunch that we played with. Sam Sarah, just one like a metal kind of thing. But Repercussion was kind of interesting. And I don't think we ever played with them. Oh, God. And there was one with two girls, Arju High. There was a band called Arju High, I remember, in the very early days. They were very soulful. They had this female singer who was really powerful singer. Anyway, then you skip to, I got a record deal. That was it. When I was 20, there was this guy who started a label, Portland, Maine, but he was in New York. And I didn't know, you know, how you got a record deal, so I started calling all the record labels. In my ignorance, I was like, I'll just call them all up. You know, Elektra and Polygram and all these, like, you know, big time labels. I'm like, literally pulling albums out of my stack, going, I like this band. Oh, they're on this label. All right, I'll call them. You know, and I would call, and God, you know, the band could have been off the label for 10, 20 years by that point. I mean, we just didn't have the knowledge. The internet wasn't there yet. So I would just call these people. That's going to
be a growing theme on this podcast, I can tell also.
Yeah. Like just the sheer ignorance of coming out of Northern Virginia at that time. Yeah, well, we didn't have the network either. I mean, you think Discord was all, basically, somebody described it to me. I won't mention their names, but it was a band that had gotten, so there was a Northern Virginia punk rock band, or hard, you know, I guess pre-hardcore band that was supposed to open for the Dead Kennedys. And a certain somebody from a giant hardcore label in D.C. kind of put the kibosh on it because he wanted one of his bands to open up. Right? And he explained to me, like, I was talking to this guy, and I'm like, well, what the hell is that about? And he was like, look, man, it's all about who you know. It's your friends. It's like, it's the same as anything. It's like that, you know, they're doing cool things, but at the same time, and that's kind of the way I felt about, you know, said label that we all know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? It was kind of like, oh, well, you know, no, that's not us. Which I totally agree. I mean, Ugly would have been terrible on that label. You know what I mean? And what the fuck are you going to do with a folk, like an acoustic I wouldn't even call it folk. It was just sort of, songs with guitar, but you use the acoustic guitar medium. You can't say that. There was no pigeonhole for the music. That was kind of the ugly, I think, was.
But like you said, I mean, it was a bipolar band. So if
right.
something like
which made everybody shy away from it.
something like, well, not me, but something like Rag, or some of the stuff on Negotiations in the Smith Room,
right?
Like Dig the Moon or something like that.
Yeah, I think Dig the Moon was still. I think Dig the Moon might have been too poppy for hardcore. I mean, I was into beat poetry and shit like that, and that's kind of
Yeah, but I mean, stuff like Rites of Spring or Branch Manager. They had stuff that was somewhat similar.
That's funny. I knew that guy Ron. I met that dude Ron. I think that's his name. Ron or John. He was like the main guy from Branch Manager. I met him in Richmond when I went to VCU for a year. Super nice guy, crazy nice. And then the next time I saw him, this is funny. I have like 3 memories. One is at a basement party seeing a band called Scrambled Legs in Richmond, which I thought they were fantastic. Terrible name, but like fantastic band. Just the great musicians. It was 2 guitar players and a drummer. And I saw him there, and you'd see him around. There was the Village Cafe in Richmond back in that time where you'd see, all the Richmond schmoes, Dave Brocky and the like. And then I saw him in Herndon. Like I moved back. I only went to VCU for like a year. And then I moved back to Northern Virginia, and then I saw him. He was working for a delivery place. And I pulled up next to him in my car, and he was like, sitting next to me. And I'm like, beep, beep, hey, man. It's pretty funny. And then I saw him at a show, and I was like, hey, what are you doing here? He's like, oh, I'm playing. And I was like, oh, that's cool. What's your band? It was kind of like a weird succession, like a rapid history of his life.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's how memories go. It's always in like bits and snatches and just like random, things.
I just wish there was a way I wish I had what they call memory, so you could tie in continuity to your. One of my big problems is I know my lyrics because I'll get in the middle of a song and then something will distract me and I'll, Sorry, I had to let the dog out.
Well, I think you do a pretty good job of keeping this straight. You at least right now you're doing a fairly good job of chronologically telling the story.
Well, thanks. And I'm half a pint in. Maybe the bourbon's helping.
So I'm curious, like when did you discover, you said that you started writing the songs, and doing originals. When did you kind of discover that you could, that you could write your own tunes, that you could, you could really sing,
This is really funny. So, I was mowing lawns when I was 14. I was playing guitar and I was saving up to buy this, the guitar that I have now, my 1970 Gibson SG. And, it was like a friend of my guitar teacher's, and he was like, yeah, man, $280. And I was like, yeah, cool. Look, give me the summer and I'll come up with the money. It was, back in the days of a handshake. And so I busted my ass all summer when I was 14, and I mowed lawns and mowed lawns and mowed lawns. And then, I had this one client who was like this, she was really cute. I remember that, but she had like 2 little kids. And, being 14, you're like, well, that's odd that I'm attracted to this old lady. But she had to be like, 25 or something like that. But her husband was a police officer for Vienna, which, it's kind of odd because Vienna police are Nazis. But, or were Nazis, I should say. I don't know if they are anymore. So, yeah, she would always bring me in and be like, look, if you're ever going to do drugs, I want you to come to me, and I'll make sure that you're safe, because I had a friend that did cocaine and drowned in a pool. And I was always like, that's a weird, random thing to tell me, because I was straight. It's funny, I didn't have a drink or smoke a cigarette really until I was like 23. And it was all downhill from there. But yeah, so she had like some sort of crazy tragic life where her mother had passed away from cancer, and they sent her to therapy, and one of the therapies that they gave her was songwriting. And she was like, the more I did it, there it goes. The better I got at it, right? So it's just like songwriting, like anything, is about practice and, that kind of thing. And I was kind of like, okay, cool. And I'd always sung, so singing wasn't like really the issue. It was how to sing. It wasn't like, could I sing? It was like, how do you control your voice? Because nobody ever says your voice is an instrument. I mean, they say that, they don't elaborate on it, where like your voice is an instrument, so you can use it 1,000 different ways. You can talk, you can do Bob Dylan-y kind of talk singy things. You can, you know what I mean? You can be soulful and loud, and here are the ways to do that, And I think I took a voice class when I was in Richmond, actually, because my voice was always, if you listen to like really, really early recordings of me, like 17 and 18 years old, it's my voice is like really high. There used to be this guy in Richmond named Bill who would always be like, he would call me Trelly Post the cream corn sex god. Which I always thought was funny, and just because my voice was like this, like really high, really smooth, vocal quality. So, and I hated that. I by all means, I wanted my voice to be Tom Waitsy, and I had a friend who gave me a record in high school in 85, 86. Gave me he was like, dude, you got to listen to this. This is freaking crazy. It's awesome. And I was like, what is it? He was like, well, it's this guy. His name's Tom Waits, and my sister's boyfriend, who turned out to be a corrupt Alexandria cop. Well, and I use corrupt in like a light term. He used to basically like frisk kids for their drugs and then smoke their drugs. It'd be like, he'd pull over like a car full of stoned teenagers and be like, I'm going to have to either tell your parents or turn this into the department or whatever. And then they'd be like, just take the drugs.
Sounds like a good cop to me.
Yeah. If I were ever pulled over for something, I would want them to just take whatever I had and leave me alone. But yeah, so he was into Tom Waits, which made total sense, right? And then, my buddy Pat gave me this record, and I was like, this is freaking awesome. And Nighthawks at the Diner was like a pivotal record for me. Songwriting wise. I was just like,
that's one of the best like live albums you've ever made.
Yeah. I mean, that whole thing about, what is it, it was an anthem of mine until I got married, the Better Off Without a Wife. I was like, man, this is genius. This guy can write. But which is funny because now I think in the later stuff, Kathleen Brennan actually started doing a lot of writing with him, which is where he gets into the really weird, the captain is a one-eyed dwarf.
Really? That's written with the wife?
Yeah, I think when he gets into, sadly, I think it's when he gets into the whole, he started hooking up with William S. Burroughs and John Giorno, like the New York scene. He starts to become a little bit like, he starts doing heroin, basically.
Yeah,
and I
think the Black Rider stuff.
Even before that, like, I think it was Frank's Wild Years. I could be confused about the way they came out. It was either Frank's Wild Years or Rain Dogs. And those were really, like, I was just like, holy shit. Like, this is fucking brilliant. There's no other way to say it. You know what I mean? It's just like, this is, again, it's inspired, right? It's like the Minutemen. The Minutemen.
Yeah, but that's so not your vocals.
Right. Either one of them, right? So that's the funny thing, is it turns into this like who are you? How are you? You can't be Tom Waits. You can't be Bob Dylan. You can't be D. Boone. You know what I mean? So what's
your voice, your singing voice is prettier than any of them.
Right. Well, and that's the rub, right? It's like I didn't want to be pretty. But I was this, long-haired. I mean, if you see pictures of me when I'm like 20, I've got like 170 pounds. I got long blonde hair. I look like a girl. Which, I was kind of like, it worked for me. But yeah, it was kind of about it, and that's, I think, when you going back to like a way previous statement you made about folk music and punk rock, and I did see a connection there. I thought that punk was kind of the new folk. Does that make sense? Like in a protest sense, like telling the common man's story, or pointing out fallacies, and it's a very liberalist, left-wing sort of way to go. It was kind of a way to for people that didn't have a voice to express themselves, and I believed in that. And so
that mom kind of helped you. Find that.
Yeah. So the mowing lawn thing. Yeah, she was like, look, you just need to do it. I was like, I'd love to write songs. I want to be in a band, and I want to do this. I mean, you're 14. You know what I mean? You're an open book. And she was like, just do it. Practice and write songs. The first ones will be terrible, and the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And she was right. You know what I mean? You write the first song, you're like, oh, this is really good. I'm really talented. I didn't know I was this talented. And then you listen back to it 4 days later, and you're like, oh, God, it's awful. So it was kind of...
What's the first one you wrote that you were really proud of?
Oh... I think it's always funny because the writer always has a different view than... It's funny, I was looking at the YouTube stats, and it looks like Salvation gets more hits than anything else. And I liked Salvation. At that point, I was trying to write more, I hate to say this, but commercially, but not commercially at the same time. I was like, what's going to be... Because there was always this thing, what's the hook?
I mean, it's commercial. It's almost got like Nirvana type chords,
right?
Like something off Nevermind or something like
that.
That.
Me off, yeah. Smells Like Teen Spirit has a similar chord structure to. I remember like somebody coming up to me. I was working at Tower Records, and they were like, "Hey man, you hear this band? I think they stole your song." It was like dang, 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 dang. It was kind of inverted, but it was the same chords. And I was like, oh.
It's similar. It really is similar, and you really did write it first.
Yeah.
Kind of cool.
Baby, I load my gun for you. If I thought that it would solve the problem, then I think again, it seems to me I think my gun is broken. If you're planting poison berries, I will not be your seed. If you built a garden, baby, well, I must be a weed. Maybe you're just a hoard, a little piece of information. I open up my arms to you and embrace every notion with the hopes of salvation.
You were onto something in terms of trying to write something commercial.
Yeah, but then again, I didn't want it to be. I understand. For a long time, I really despised Kurt Cobain. Not because of that, just I kind of thought I was like, yeah, fucking, it's pop music, you know. And Dave Grohl too. I saw Dave Grohl play in Scream. What was it? It was Embrace, which was like Ian MacKay's, you know, venture from Minor Threat into Fugazi. And then it was Embrace, Dag Nasty, Fugazi. Oh no, I'm sorry. Embrace, Dag Nasty, Dane Branage, and Scream. Yeah, and Scream. And so I saw Dave Grohl play as the kid.
That's a veritable like who's who of punk rock from that time period.
Right. Although we don't call it Virginia, we call it D.C. Even though everybody's from Virginia except for maybe one or two people, which I think is the other. It's the other travesty of the Northern Virginia / DC music scene is that you can't. It's not cool if you grew up in the suburbs, right? So you don't suffer enough, you know, if you're.
Well, how many times did you tell people, you know, when they asked where you were from, I'm from, you know, right outside of DC, or even I'm from DC, just to not have like necessarily the Virginia conversation.
Right. Yeah, no, I've done that 1,000 times, you know, or more. You'd be like, oh, we're from D.C. Just because if you say Virginia, they're like, oh, what farm?
Yeah.
You know, you're like, no.
So let me take you back 1 second, because you mentioned something interesting a little bit before. And it's kind of something that, you know, makes you different from a lot of those other bands that you sort of named. And that is, you know, you actually pursued getting a recording contract, and you actually eventually wound up recording, you know, a significant amount and putting out several albums.
Right.
So you said that you know, when you were like, I don't know if it was 20 or whatever, you just started cold calling.
Yeah.
And managed to get an actual, you know, recording contract with a random label.
No, it was one of those terrible. So they have these predatory sort of labels that were. Their idea was like, well, we don't have any money, so what we'll do is we'll pick artists that do well, and this guy was like across the board, like he had a heavy metal band. Which is funny because it had one of the guys that I knew from Hawaii, actually, and he was based out of Portland, Maine. So you've got Hawaii, Portland, Maine, and Virginia, right? And all of a sudden these like random connections start to happen. It was very odd. But what he would do is you would go and record the record, which we did, which I wish I still had a copy of it actually. And then you would sell pre-sales in order to print the record, which had to be like, you know, it was like $2,000, which was a lot of money back in 1988 or 89 or whatever it was. And then you would have to like go sell the record because back in those days, the major labels had kind of a fix on everything. It was hard to get stuff in stores, well, real stores, you know, not off.
Yeah, not consigned
stores. Yeah, you couldn't do like, you know, like hey, like Record Convergence, right? Like, you know, which was freaking great. Like all those, like, you know, Record Tape Exchange and Record Convergence, and God, there were so many. It was just like, you know, they were awesome because they would take your stuff and sell it. And I think those guys are, you know, like Ted from Record Convergence is like a hero to me. Like, you know. You talk about the Ian MacKays of the world. Let's talk about the Teds of the world. Just like totally like just devours music and catalogs it in his brain, and it's just like the sweetest guy you could ever meet. Ted from Record Convergence is just one of my all-time favorite people. But anyway. I don't know if you ever met him. He was like the little, you know, he was the old guy.
I'm sure I met him a million times because I spent so much time there.
Right.
You know, but I didn't know him by name or have like a relationship with him.
Right.
At any point, but you know, that place certainly turned me on to a lot of music that I wouldn't have discovered otherwise.
Oh yeah.
And,
well, it shifts your perception too, right? Like one of the things I remember going into record convergence and being like, you know, they're playing, and you know, me, I have to be like audibly like aware of what's happening for some reason, and they were playing a record that I was kind of like, wow, this is fucking great. What is this? And they were like, oh, it's Peter Tosh. And I was like, it was like early ska, right?
yeah.
Like Peter, and I didn't know, like but there was no internet. You know, nowadays kids would be like, well, you couldn't read that on Wikipedia. You're like, yeah, well, there was no fucking Wikipedia when we were growing up.
Yeah,
and
Peter Tosh wasn't in the encyclopedia, I don't think either.
No, so it's kind of one of those, like, I remember, like, listening to this record and being like, this is Peter Tosh, and it was, you know, so it was Bill, actually, who was like, yeah, no, it's a great record, you should own this record. And I'm like, why don't you tell me when these things, you know, like, Bill knows my taste, you know, precisely, so he can be like, you know, that's Peter Tosh, of course, you know, let's, this Charlie would love this. It's funny, the things that Bill nowadays, when I talk to him, he's like last time I talked to him, he was like, you know what you'd really like? I was like, what's that? And he's like, the pretty things. It was this French guy who hired a psychedelic band to be his backing band, and they put out like these 4 albums. And I find that really interesting because it's like psychedelic stuff. My wife is really into psychedelic stuff, and I love psychedelic stuff, but it has to, again, with me, it's like not like, is it psychedelic? Cool, I love it. You know, it's like, does it warrant, it's like album to album, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the rub with me. Like Fugazi, like the first record was awesome, and then everything else sounds exactly the same to me, with little less lyrical representation. It's kind of like, oh, okay, so this is what you do, and now you're just reproducing it. And that happens a lot, I think, with a lot
sound,
of it. That's not,
a sound versus song.
Right.
You know,
and I'm a song purveyor. I'm not a, you know, like even the Minutemen, like the 3-Way Tie for Laughs, I thought was terrible, which I was kind of upset about. I remember buying that album. You know, it was funny. It's one of those funny things too, where like I buy all my Minutemen albums, or I did buy all my Minutemen albums at the same place. So every time I wanted a Minutemen album, I would go back to Record and Tape Exchange in Oakton and be like, hey, what, you know, Minutemen do you have? You know, and I'd be like, what else do they have? And the guy would be like, well, I can order you this. I'd be like, great, you know, bring it in. But that album I thought was really kind of poppy and slower, and the sound production wasn't what I liked. Like they had the Spot doing a lot of the stuff. There was a guy named Spot who produced a bunch of who's apparently like a bipolar, I don't know if that's true. Again, you know, all these punk rock things are heavily
apocryphal.
veiled in, heavily veiled in mythology. But, you know, like I remember a friend of mine in Richmond once was like, hey man, he called me up and he's like, I'm at a bar and you're never going to guess who's here. And I was like, who is it? And he's like, Spot. And I'm like, who? The guy who produced the Minutemen records and all the other SFC shit. And I was like, oh. And I was like, oh, shit, I'll be over there in a minute. And by the time I got there, he was gone. And he was like, yeah, that guy was crazy, motherfucker. I was like, I think he's bipolar. He seemed to switch personalities in mid-conversation. I was like, well, we're all guilty of that a little bit.
So the record deal didn't work out. Did you?
Oh yeah.
Did you wind up like in hock to this guy, or did you get away from it?
Well, so here's the funny thing. Okay, so what happened was I signed this record deal. I go up, I record it. Right, I even had a lawyer look at the contract because I didn't want to get like, you know, tucked into some weird record deal, and like end up like, you know, like what's his name? What's the guy from? Oh, Christ, I can never remember that dude's name. I can't remember anybody's name.
Right. Let's say a lot of musicians in the history of music. So at least you knew enough to know that you didn't want to get sucked into some recording contract where you owed somebody your soul.
The guy was funny. He was like, well, if you know what you're doing, the lawyer was like, if you know what you're doing, this isn't a bad deal. You just need to push and sell. And I was like, I can do that. I was 20. I don't give a shit. I'm like, let's do it. I want to be in a label, that kind of thing. Which is funny. Now I don't want to be in a label. But
now you don't have to be.
Yeah, that's the beauty, right? Now you can just put shit out there. But now I'm not trying to. Originally I really wanted to make my living being a songwriter. Like it's funny. It's one of those like life goals. Like you think of like all the great songwriters, Dusty Springfield, or old time like soul people that like worked not only recording stuff and touring, but they also like wrote a lot of songs that other people covered. I mean, it's like how awesome would it be to have Aretha Franklin call you the
like
the godmother of soul? Yeah, yeah, exactly. You're just kind of like, everybody covers my music, and I'm fine with that, and I can live in this beautiful spot and grow my tomatoes and walk my dog, and I don't have to worry about a thing. That would be awesome.
Yeah, but you can sing and really play also.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's backwards. You can play and really sing.
Well, we just never had the representation to make that a thing. I mean, it was always like, I remember, it's funny because I remember like singing my heart out at shows, and people would be like, man, Bill can really play the congas. And I was like, yes he can. Or, man, Chuck's a really great drummer. And it was it's always like ego based, and especially when you're in your 20s, like everything's fucking ego based. It's like, it's like, who's better at something? You just want to be good at something. You want to be acknowledged for something. And I would get like yeah, I really love your voice. And I'd be like, oh, thank you so much. But it wasn't personally on a deep level, it didn't happen enough to really make me think I did have a good voice. People would be like, yeah, well, you've got a really soulful voice, and that's like a tactic you need to use for marketing your music. And I'd be like, I don't know what that means.
What?
Yeah. So it was kind of one of those things, I was kind of like, and Bill, to be hands down, Bill was a fucking phenomenal showman. We did finally get to play. We were one of those outliers of the DC scene. Again, the lock that those people had on the DC scene was crazy. I mean, it was so incestuous. It was just insane. Like I used to go down when I was 17, 18. I would go down to Food for Thought and play, and that was Dante's dad. Dante owns Black Cat, right? So, and he was in Gray Matter and all those, really punk rock bands, and so Dante's dad was, he was just an awesome guy. He was, respectful and the booking person there was great. And that's what kind of led into everything else, I think, actually, because that's like the hippie Food for Thought scene kind of bled into the DC punk rock scene, right? But those people like lived in DC. Right? And they were actually nicer than the Northern Virginians who claimed to be in DC. Mm. So it became this, and I guess you gotta pick your battles when you're at a certain level. But it was kind of one of those things like, oh God, this is so fucking hard to describe without being a dick. Okay, so hold on, I need to wrap my head around this a little bit. The playing at Food for Thought gave me a avenue into the DC music scene early, right? Because Food for Thought shut down quickly thereafter. But all those people knew each other. All the like smaller kind of alternative places knew each other. So Dante's dad owned Food for Thought. And then Dante played hardcore in the early DC hardcore era. So he's probably like, 5-6 years older than me. And then he starts booking bands and doing stuff. And it's one of those funny things, right? Like, so I'll never forget there was this. Have you ever heard of Bernie?
No. Bernie?
Bernie's a fixture, kind of. He's a guy that's been around DC forever. Bernie's awesome. He's like this tall, skinny, long-haired, hippie guy, also with extremely eclectic music taste. And it was always this funny thing. Like, somebody told me that Bernie and Dante had an argument about whether they liked. So I was in a band with Bill called Shoutbus. It was Bill's band, right? They were all his songs, kind of punk rock, quick 20-minute, almost Minutemen-esque songs. So I was in this band with Bill called Shoutbus, and then there was also an Ugly, and they kind of overlapped right at the very end of Ugly. And it was kind of funny because Bernie, who you would think would like Ugly more, and Dante, who you would think would like Shoutbus more, they would switch, and they would argue. And I don't know whether this is true. Again, this is like, hearsay. But they would like argue. They were like, I really like that. Like Dante really liked Ugly, and therefore he would book us at the Black Cat. Whereas Cynthia, who worked at the 930 Club, who was a holdout of the Ian Mackay Discord era, for whatever reason, we never got into. We could have filled. Keep in mind, the old 930 Club is a 300 capacity place.
Yeah.
So we could have totally done that. That was not an issue, but they wouldn't book us until they started to close. And then they were kind of like, they did this funny thing, which I really appreciate because I always wanted to play on that stage where I grew up there, like going, I could make it 19 minutes from 1930, or what do you call it? 930 F Street to my front door in 19 minutes. Back in the day. So I would run down and see shows and be home by 1 or 2 in the morning and then get up and go to school. So they did this weird thing where they started being like, oh, who are the people that we didn't let in? Or at least that's the way I saw it. I was kind of like, I was like, oh shit, 930 Club's closing. God damn it. All right, fine. And then the next thing you know, like my drummer Chuck is like, dude, we got to gig at 930 Club, and I was so excited about that. But I remember that's like where I saw the video, because like usually when I play I have my eyes closed, right? I close my eyes and I play guitar, and that's what I see. And then I saw the video of Bill, and he was like lifting the conga set above his head and screaming and all this stuff, and I was like, what the hell? What have I been missing? What I mean? Like, I had no idea this was going on. It was kind of like, he's an amazing performer, and he really is. I mean, he's just like, he's good, and the guy's like talented as shit. He still is. He's like writing books and stuff, and it's pretty awesome. But oh yeah, so where did I go off track this time?
I think around Bernie. Bernie and Dante.
But, Bernie and Dante. Yeah, it was before that. But yeah, so Bernie and Dante was just like a funny, like kind of.
But I guess essentially you're sort of explaining. I think bottom line you're kind of explaining why Ugly made it or didn't.
Right. Well, there's like so many politics in DC music. It's like you have to agree with everything. You have to like everything. Like, have you heard this band? They're great. Have you heard this? They're great. You can't have an opinion, which is, I think, kind of like the shot in the ass that DC needs. It's like, it's like, why can't you express your value? I was just listening to a thing today where a woman was talking about, she's a social scientist, and she's talking about rather than locking people out, right? Like leftists versus rightists. You've got your super conservatives and you've got your super liberals. And there was a KKK leader who started having conversations with this black woman, and they've just conversations, and they just talked and talked and talked, and then all of a sudden the guy was like, I have to leave the KKK because I no longer believe this. Right? It was a TED Talk. And I was like, wow, that's crazy deep. Right? Because it's just one of those things. Like, it's like, I remember you meet, and the varieties. It's like this whole, it comes down to this like a personality, how do you say it? Like your approach versus your discipline versus your, I guess there's so many factors. I think about it that way. There's like a million things that affect the way a person can come to a decision, right? But basically, you need to be open. You need to talk. You need to talk about stuff. And I never felt like DC was like that. It was kind of like, don't you see my way? Isn't this the way everything should be? And you're kind of like, well, I don't know. I mean, do you think that would lead to this later on, or can you see? You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. And so I never appreciated the DC lockout sort of culture. You know what I mean? Those people, and you have to remember, this is 20 people. The early DC scene was 20, 30 people, right? And they were all high school buddies that, took pictures of each other. I mean, Cynthia that booked 930 Club, I can't believe I'm going to say this on a podcast. Cynthia that booked 930 Club was Ian MacKay's girlfriend for a little while, right? Mm-hmm. So there becomes this incestuous nature, and it's the same thing we see in fucking everything. It's just it becomes this way that we idolize things, and they become bigger and bigger and bigger.
Was
so
there
the Riot Girl thing. Oh,
well, was there no other way to do it? I mean, was there no?
There probably was. I mean, but it took a lot of legwork and cooperation between a lot of different people. I mean, at that point, we didn't have it. It was one of those. I remember Iota. Iota was. I'm so sad that it closed. Iota was one of our saving graces, and as well as Cousins. We played at this bar called Cousins in Vienna, Fairfax area. It was just across Nutley from Vienna. And we played there for 2 years every Wednesday and made, I think what, $100, $200. And that's what allowed us to pay for rehearsal space. And we didn't have some dude's basement where we could set up and leave all our shit there and have a PA and play. We had to, pay for rehearsal space. Early days, we could set up in my mom's basement for, one day. But after that, it became okay, you've got to pay $50 a week for a rehearsal space. So, and then you've got to buy a van.
Not bad split between 4 or 5 guys.
Well, yeah,
all considering,
Yeah, that never worked.
I'd kill for $50 a month.
Bill and I, yeah, seriously. Well, now you would. I mean, back in the day, it was I was terrible at holding a job, to be honest. I was I was just what's the point? I remember I walked into a place called Stuffin' Turkey in Tyson's Corner Mall, and I got a job for, they were like, come back tomorrow. And I walked in the next day, and there was some 20-year-old dickhead general manager who was kind of this is the way you mix the stuffing, and this is the way you do this, and you always wear your name tag. And name tags became a big thing for me. I was like, I don't ever want to fucking wear a name tag again. This is so demeaning. And I left on my break. And then there was another time. I'm like the king of quitting jobs. It was actually that's another funny story.
Yeah, it's better than getting fired, man.
Yeah. Well, it is, and it's a great feel. You get an endorphin rush from quitting a job. But so anyway, my friend Karen Doff used to run the what's that theater that used to be? It's now like a West Elm or some shit. That theater in Georgetown. God, I can't remember. It was right on Wisconsin and M. It was like the main.
Yeah, I remember
that.
It was down on like the lower part of the street. That's where I saw Clerks and Dazed and Confused.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I saw. It's really funny. When I was in high school, I saw. It was my first introduction to Gary Oldman, and it was Sid and Nancy. And then I got beat up by skinheads afterwards, which I thought was funny. I was like, "Why are skinheads at a Sid and Nancy like thing?" But so they had this. It was right before it closed, and there was a movie called American Job where the guy goes in and like quits, does something, and my friend Karen is, she's the manager of the joint, right? She's like, and they had, this was the funny thing. So they had Ian MacKaye come and open the movie.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was kind of like, well, what's he doing here? And she's like, oh, he's opening the movie. She was like, you should have done this. You've quit more jobs than that man has ever held. And I was kind of like, yeah, I have. Not to be proud of that, but yeah, it's kind of one of those funny things. Like that place. I mean, we saw the 22s and the Goons. Remember, they had this it was an awesome punk rock show. The Key Theater. That was what it was called.
The Goons. Theater. I love the Goons.
Oh, the Goons are. Serge is just a sweetheart. You just gotta love that man. You just want to give him a hug.
I'd like to get them on the podcast too.
Oh yeah, Serge will talk some shit. He's a veritable Trevor Trove. Treble? I don't think I'm saying
Treasure.
Treasure trove. Thank you. I'm like Treble Trove. That's not the right pronunciation. A treasure trove of knowledge of DC. Like a lot of those guys. It's funny because I do not consider myself a DC punk guy. I dabbled in it. I dipped my toes in it. But
You played the Black Cat and the 930 Club. That's
Yeah, but still, it's like that thing.
You put out a 7-inch.
Yeah, but there's a reason
that gives you a bit of cred.
There's a reason that 9353 won't be in that DC documentary, and I find that highly powerful. Do you know who 9353 is?
No.
First of all, oh Jesus, good Lord, man, do your history. 9353 is like one of the seminal,
Teach me, teacher.
9353 is like one of the seminal DC they just came out of nowhere. They were like this weird. I don't even know if you can call it new wave. They were so bizarre. And they have an album called Overdose at Your Mother's House, which is just absolutely brilliant. But they were just kind of like this song that went, the police were here today, said you were spraying people with urine out of jars. Hey, Tommy, let's get on out of here and work on these cars. Hey, Tommy, hey, Tommy, hey, Tommy. And now, anybody that knows that song is going to go, like, holy shit, I have to listen to 9353. So bizarro. I've gotten, the older I get, the more I go towards atonal, what's his name? Parch. He's guy that like builds his own instruments and plays them, and then it started off with like Bavarian cello music. Like, yeah, I got this album when I worked at Tower called Yasser Starker Plays Kadai, and I was like, Kadai? Oh, this is brilliant. Like, I love Kadai. And then, this classical guy in the department is like, oh, well, you should listen to Bartok then. And you start listening to Bartok. And then you kind of get like, oh, this is nice, but it's still almost too pretty. Like, I kind of want the music. After you've been, wonderfully satisfied by music, I feel like you want it to kind of like offend you, right? It's like dating a girl. You're like, well, that was nice. We kissed. Now I kind of want you to slap my nuts a little. I don't know how else to say it. Like, but you have to say that to the girl. Like, you kind of have to say that to the music. Except with music, you can go find it. You can be like, all right, what's going to slap my nuts a little? So you're looking around for the music that's going to give you the shocker. And that's really the, you start exploring outside of, I don't know, when I talk to people that are like, locked into one kind of music, I'm interestingly enough, I'm kind of like, well, you don't really know. And it's not like it's a judgment, but it's not a judgment. It's like, oh, well, you think this way, right? And I think this way, and those two things are fine, but I'm looking for people that want to get kicked in the nuts. Does that make sense?
I don't know about getting kicked in the nuts. Like, slapping my nuts a little bit, sure.
Well, musically getting kicked in the nuts and actually getting kicked in the nuts are two different things.
Yes, they are. Well, I like to get musically kicked in the nuts a little bit, but sometimes, I'll listen to some atonal stuff that it's too much for me. I need something to grab on.
Right. Well, and I honestly think it comes down to your brain waves, man. It's like, if your brain processes that shit as chaos, right, and you're not used to chaos, then you're gonna hate it.
Yeah.
If your brain processes it as like ambient noise, like if you grew up next to a subway or a train or something in Chicago, right, you'd be like, oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I can only listen to noise so much. Right. It's like I want pieces of noise in things, but then I want it to go back to something organized that my brain can kind of handle.
Right. And I can appreciate that. I love that. I mean, that's an art form in and of itself. Like, again, going back to that King Crimson, like, disoriented sort of percussion and into like heavy orchestration. It's like it's a I don't know, what's that trick that would cheapen it, but it's a method of achieving an emotion, right? It's like I keep trying to like take pretty with songwriting, because that's what I do, apparently, and kind of break it apart and make it a little dirtier, right? Like, if you can talk about like death, and I remember there's one song, it's what's it called? Something about if you die the smallest death, which is having an orgasm in French. The French, right?
Yeah.
So like this whole thing, it's like, oh, he's talking about death, but I'm not talking about death. I'm talking about, or am I talking about that? It's kind of that thing. It's like and then that's like a cheap version. That's kind of easy, but I kind of like to like fuck up, or I like to try to fuck up the songwriting with the singing, so that pretty isn't just like, pretty. Like Roberta Flack's first album, First Take, is the name of her first album. Absolutely gorgeous, and whoever produced it did a fantastic job, because they curated these amazing songs, just like, and fantastic musicians, and they pushed it as a jazz album, even though it's more of, in my mind, it's more of a just a beautiful soul album. I think, and she's a DC native. Yeah. Roberta Fleck.
Well,
who knew?
So speaking of production, when did you guys like start recording, and how did you decide where you were?
This is great.
You were going to record. Yeah.
It's so the first place we recorded was a place, this guy named Tito Gracia. I think that was his name. Tito Gracia. And he was in Arlington, and he had like a little tiny, I mean, you know, as would be back in those days, like reel-to-reel 4-track. And this was I think we made a tape called, it was with Hector and Tom and Brian Green and myself, and we did a record. Well, the first thing I did, going back way, way, way back, there was a friend of mine named Barry that gave me $800 in 1988 to make a demo tape. And he was a drug dealer at the time. He is no longer.
You and NWA.
Yeah, right. To pay him more money. But he gave me this $800, and he was like, "I want you to sing, man. I want you to sing," and blah blah. I got to make a demo tape, and I was like, "All right, cool." So I made this demo tape called "A Cow and His Man," and it was like 8-9 songs of just me, acoustic guitar and vocals, and it really could have been done. I think the guy, who's in Vienna, lived off Beulah Road, and I think he ripped me off because it didn't sound that good. But anyway, I made covers, and I did this and that. And
does it still exist?
I don't think so. I've even looked for a copy that I own, and I can't find it. I'm sure there's someone out there that has a cassette tape that I would love to hear. It's I mean, and I have a lot of that stuff. A lot of it I had transferred to DAT tape about 7 years ago. And I'll send you, I have those 2 discs, and you can listen to all that awful early shit if you want. Oh my God, it's terrible. It's just like, it's just like you have to like suffer to get to the point where you feel like you're doing something better. But yeah, so I did that first, Cow and His Man, and then I did like Ugly got together, and we recorded at Tio Gracia's studio in Arlington, and we put out Hurry Up and Wait, which was like I don't know. It was another cassette tape. Because you could go to this place in Springfield and have the, I don't know, however many cassette tapes you wanted printed out, with, a nice sticky, like a label put on them. So we had Hurry Up and Wait done, and that had a picture of me we called the Mud Baby photo, which was kind of funny. I had this friend, Nick Bluen, that was in photo school, still friends. He's a scientist now out in Laramie, Wyoming. And he took photos of me. My friend Mel had just had a baby, and who's now like I think she's a doctor, the baby, which is like far out. Like I'm like, wow. And apparently she hates those photos. But there was a pond at Cox's farm out in I don't know, wherever their farm was. And so I got all naked and I rolled around on the mud and everything. And then they handed me the baby. I was like, okay, hand her to me. It was like a concept kind of photo, right? And I hate holding children, by the way. So I'm terrified of holding this, newborn. Hannah was like, 2 months, 3 months old, and I'm holding this screaming baby that's like, it's cold, it's October, what the hell are you doing to me? And I'm kind of like, get this baby out of my hands. But anyway, yeah, so I have these, the picture on the cover is the mud, we call it the Mud Baby photo.
I got to see that.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it. I think I found a couple copies. I mean, I'm sure the negatives are gone, but I think I have.
What songs were on the Mud Baby one?
there's a song called Angel, which I don't know if anybody's ever heard before. It's Angel, hold me, talk to me in your perfect voice or something like that. Hold me in your way. In your eyes or arms, it matters not to me. Something. It was supposed to be like I was really into Billie Holiday also. You can tell my musical intake is not from a certain variety. It's kind of all across. Like I kind of like take in like, what's that? That sounds nice. I'll listen to that. What's that? I'll listen to that too. So yeah, for a little while I was really influenced actually by female vocalists. Billie Holiday, Joan Armatrading's first album, Roberta Flack's first album, second one too, but not as much. And they all do this thing where they drag the melody. So the Beatles start and they come in after that, right? Like, the look of love is in your eyes. They're like dragging the melody a little bit. And I always thought that was really cool. You ever heard David Sedaris do Billie Holiday?
No.
Oh, it's freaking hilarious. You got to check it out. Just like put that in YouTube. David Sedaris, Billie Holiday. He does this whole like, lover, come back to me. It'll kill you. You'll be on the floor laughing. But yeah. So then we went from Tio's studio to Christian's. And that's really where, things kind of took root. So Christian Quick ran Stillness Sound Facilities in Warrenton, and that was like a Tom was always the guy. Tom loved technology, and probably still does, but he was like, hey, there's this guy Tio in Arlington, and we can record there, and I met him at this place, and I was like, I didn't know anything about recording, so I was like, yeah, it sounds great, let's do it. And then he was like, Christian, he's out in Warrenton, and I was like, Warrenton? That's like an hour away. How dare we go to Warrenton, But it was awesome. I mean, it was in the back of like a music store. So I remember like the first time we walked in, they were like, I didn't give a shit about the instruments. There was a 1968 BMW motorcycle sitting right in the entrance to the studio, and I was like, I want this. Everybody's like, hey, bring in your equipment, set it up here. I'm like, I want this motorcycle. I can't hear you. This is beautiful. But anyway, I'm a little bit of a bike snob. So we ended up recording Round Boy Laughing at Christian's studio, which was 1/4-inch, 8-track, reel to reel. And he had a bunch of little, rooms. They all had wooden floors and plaster walls, which were very hard and, percussive. So you had to like kind of move things around and he had like office separators that he would move in front and kind of move them around. Mm-hmm. Sounds like that sound is such a weird thing. And Christian's like a crazy intelligent guy. He actually lives less than a mile from me right now. And then he ended up doing really well. Like he recorded a bunch of Discord bands. What's the one that does the gospel thing? They were kind of cute. DC hardcore label band.
I don't remember.
Oh, they did this whole thing. It was like live at the something Rice or something like that. I don't know. It was just one of Sibonius's. What is it? Sibonius? I don't know. But Ian, I think it's Sibonius. But his Live at Cold Rice. That's what it was called. But they didn't do that one. They did that one in DC, and then the next album they did out in Christian's studio, and he did a whole bunch of stuff. But then he ended up having a Christian. I mean, this is kind of like it's like that same blessing and a curse thing. Like nobody in Virginia ever gets off easy. Christian ended up getting like an ear thing where he started hearing flat in certain frequencies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as a sound engineer, he was like, I couldn't do that anymore. And I was like, fuck that. Like, train somebody. You're good at this. Like, make it your facility, and you can hear this stuff later on, and you can, learn how to see it or something. I don't know. Train your brain. But, I don't know, Learn how to see sound. How do you do that? I guess we have computers for that now, but anyway. So then we went to Christian and we recorded Round Boy Laughing, and things really picked up for us. And then we did the 7-inch with Christian as well. And then we decided, for some reason, we were like, well, we got to do better. There's all this digital stuff, and I don't know. It was like the band was falling apart by that point. By the time we started to go into the studio for the Electric album negotiations in the Smith Room, it was the early days of the falling apart. But it was kind of like Bill was getting more into DC. He had moved into DC. He was really into the scene. He didn't want to play shows with, certain cover charges, which I totally appreciate, or age limits or anything like that. And then I just wanted to get to the point where I could write songs and make a living doing that. And Chuck wanted to support himself, and Tom had left the band and moved to Colorado, and we got a new bass player named Dave Bombear. And Dave was, we just called him Crazy Dave. He was a little nutty. And we just kind of fell apart at that point. We went to WGNS Studios to record negotiations in the Smith Room, and it was just like nothing locked up. Like the music, as much as you tried, like you could like make schedules, you could do whatever, but just nothing was tight. Like the music was fine, but it didn't have any emotion. If you listen to that record, you're kind of like, well, I kind of like this. Like, and there's a couple representations. Like now, when I listen back to it, I guess it's been enough time that I'm kind of like, I can get behind this song. There's one called Rift that I really like a lot, but it's like, it's weak. It's good, but it's weak. It could be a lot better.
I like Widths of Heaven.
Right. So Widths of Heaven was a pickup song. Like I wrote it and I was kind of like, hey, check this out. And then, Chuck was like, oh, that's cool. Let's, I'll do this. And then Bill was like, I'll do this. And Dave was like, I'll do this. You know what I mean? So it actually wasn't supposed to be on the record. It just kind of ended up being there, which is probably why it sounds better, because everybody's using their inspiration rather than their anger towards everybody else. It was funny during that recording. I remember, so I'm a type 1 diabetic, right? And I get low blood sugars when I don't eat. So in the middle of recording, what's it called? Just in Time for Dinner, at the crescendo part, where I'm doing the guitar weird thing, and it's the end of the song. It's getting kind of noisy. There's all of a sudden because I'm doing an overdub. That's what it was. And all of a sudden I see all these people at the door, and I was just like, oh, for fuck's sake. And I have to stop, and I have a juice box, and then I have another juice box. Funny, old man having juice boxes. But then all of a sudden, Mike Watt walks in through the door. And it was the night of they called it the Mike Watt Love-In. And I think it was Ball Hog or Tugboat. And so it was Evan Dando and Dave Grohl and it was punk rock buddies from the past, going on tour just to have fun. It sounds awesome. But yeah, Mike Watt walks in and he's kind of like, hey, what are you guys doing here? And Dave was a big smoker of a particular brand of tobacco. And so, he offers Mike Watt this tobacco, and Mike Watt smokes the tobacco. And then the next thing you know, they're in the back, and Dave Grohl comes in the back of the studio, and I'm just kind of I'm having a low blood sugar, and I'm totally overwhelmed. I was just sort of we're paying for this. I remember actually thinking that. I was like, I'm trying to get some shit done here, and you guys are like the guy, the studio engineer, I forget what his name was, Jeff something, he just left. Right? I didn't know whether the recording was still going on, and it was just me cursing at them, holding a guitar, having a low blood sugar, and cursing at them, getting stoned out back, or if it was, what was happening. I was just sort of we paid $10,000 for this fucking studio, which we never made back. But
I wish you could have just been yelling that at all of them. So.
Oh, I did, but they didn't give a shit. It was Dave Grohl's here. Dave Grohl's here. It's just one of those things. I'm just so sick of him. Dave Grohl's fine, but he's not God. You know what I mean? There have been more consummate, better musicians that write better songs all throughout our history, and we're not celebrating them. No, we're celebrating Dave Grohl and Ian MacKaye, who writes the same song over and over. But I didn't say that. Sorry.
I can cut out whatever you want.
You'll have to send me the final version before. I might actually just let it go, because I'm I don't care. What's anybody going to do to me now?
Nothing except for hopefully appreciate.
Yeah, well, they'll be like-minded. All I want to do is find my people. I want to find my people, my like-minded people.
Well, listen, I really, really want to ask you more about, especially, looking back, kind of what you think about a lot of the songs on Round Boy now, particularly.
Well, let's do a second session. How about that?
But that's what I was about to say. I've got to go in. I'm sitting outside my daughter's school right now.
Oh, shit. You've got to go.
I really need to go in and pick her up.
Yeah. She's
terrible.
Dad?
Exactly. She's the last girl picked up from school because I'm sitting here recording a podcast.
All right,
but
cool.
anyway, this is really fun and amazing for me. So let's pick this up if we can in the next couple of days.
Yeah, and I'll email you.
Finish this off.
Yeah, totally, and I'll email you that 9353 link and Roberta Flack.
Send me whatever whatever goes along with this, or whatever you think I'll find interesting or inspirational for our next session.
All right, cool.
All right,
I'll
man.
do it.
Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, no, please. I'm enjoying this. I'm alone. I'd be like, sticking my finger up my butt by now. Not literally.
Whatever it takes, man. Whatever it takes.
True. All right. We'll talk to you soon.
I'll call you tomorrow.
All right, cool.
Okay. I'll talk to you then.
All right, later.
Bye.